This lesson is on section 4.1, plot points in a coordinate plane. Last chapter, we just finished up chapter 3. And last chapter we worked with equations a lot. Okay, that's what we did the whole chapter. Was we solved one-step equations, solved two-step equations, equations with variables on both sides. We learned a lot of things about equations, like how to move things from one side of the equation to the other, how to move variables from one side to the other, how to get a variable by itself. We're going to use all these different type of manipulation skills for an equation to help us with this chapter, chapter 4, and the next chapter, also chapter 5. Both these next two are very closely related in terms of we'll be doing a lot of graphing equation and learning different forms of equations, and also being able to identify key numbers in an equation. One thing I want us to be able to do, especially that third bullet point, when we're done with chapter 4 and definitely chapter 5 too, when we're done with these next couple chapters, I want us to be able to look at an equation and look at the key numbers that are in it and know before a student even tries to graph the equation on a coordinate plane, I want them to be able to look at the equation, analyze it, and say, oh, I know how steep this line is going to be. I know if it's going to be a positive or negative slope. I want them to know where in the graph they should expect it to cross the y-axis without even graphing. Before they even start to do that, they should be able to look at an equation and kind of know what it's going to look like. But again, we learned a lot of things about being able to move around and work with equations like this the last chapter, and now we're going to take it into the graphing portion of linear algebra. But before we can do that, before we can start graphing an equation, we first need to remember just how to plot points. So we start, like most chapters, we start at something very basic, something that's kind of a review the students have seen before in previous grades. We're going to use that as kind of a review to build into graphing equation. When we're talking about plotting points, as students may remember, I'll ask them in class to see if they do remember. A point is something like, they probably recognize it as something like 2 comma 3 in parentheses, or negative 1 comma 4 in parentheses. It does need to be in parentheses for it to be a point, or for it to be also, these are called, as you have see below here, these are called ordered pairs. Okay, ordered pairs are an x and a y coordinate. These will also sometimes be solutions for us when we get into word problems. They can be points that we're going to plot so that we can graph an equation, or maybe sometimes we have the equation already and we need to find some ordered pairs. So many different ways that we're going to work with these points, or ordered pairs as we can call them too. Again, any ordered pair, as it says right here, is an x and a y coordinate. The x coordinate's always first, the y coordinate's always second. And what did the x and y mean? Well, down here I have a coordinate plane. Here's a coordinate plane right here. The x and the y coordinates are talking about the x and y axes. So there's the x-axis, the one that goes vertical on this plane. Or sorry, I should say horizontal. The horizontal axis is the x-axis, and the y-axis is the vertical axis, up and down. Essentially, the x and y coordinates are the directions how far we go along each of these axes. When I'm going to plot a point, those numbers are going to tell me where in this coordinate plane that point lies. If it's an x coordinate, like let's say the point, I'll kind of bring one of the points that I had up there down. I think I had the point 2, 3. The first number here, this is the x coordinate. This tells me where to go on the x coordinate, on the x-axis. In this case, it's positive 2. So positive numbers on the x-axis are over on this side. So when I'm looking for positive numbers, I'm going to go to the right. If I'm looking for negative numbers, if I just say it was negative 2, I would go to the left. Okay. So in this case, this one is positive 2. I would go 1, 2 spots to the right. The second number is the y coordinate. That one tells me up or down direction. That's where I'm going along the y-axis. And in this case, again, positive is up in this case, and negative numbers are going to be down. So, looking at this number, getting rid of some of this here just to kind of clear the way. Looking at this ordered pair, 2, 3. Since it's positive 2, I'm going to go 2 to the right on the x-axis, and then I'm going to go 3 up, 1, 2, 3. So here is where my point would be. There's the point, 2, 3. And I don't need all those extra points in. I was just kind of doing that to show you where I was going, because you can't see me exactly, but you can see the board. So over 2, up 3. If I had a point that was negative 2, 3, again, the x-coordinate's negative. So in this case, that means I'm going to go to the left on the x-axis. So I'm going to go 1, 2 left, and then up And then again, positive direction for the y-axis is up, so 1, 2, 3. So here's the point negative 2, 3. But I went to the left 2 first because it was a negative number for my x-coordinate. More thing to note about the coordinate plane that we need to remember is there's the point that we're basing everything off of is this middle point here. We start always right there in the middle at that point, 0, 0. That's where we haven't moved up or down at all. We haven't moved left or right at all. We haven't moved any direction. That's the point 0, 0, which has its name, actually, too, is the origin. And again, it kind of makes sense because that's where everything begins, like the word origin. That's where all our points are going to start. If we're going to plot any point, we're always going to start at 0, 0 and then move from there. If we're going to graph equations, we'll often start at the origin and then move up or down so much, and then graph the equation from where that is. The origin is the basis of all the direction in the coordinate plane, so we definitely need to know where that is. It's where the y-axis and the x-axis intersect. So where they intersect, right there in the middle, that point 0, 0, important point, is the origin. That's where we're going to start always when we're plotting points or graphing equations. So to run through some examples together, we're going to plot these points that I have down here, listed A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Plot these points together to see where they'd fall in the coordinate plane. And again, this should be kind of a review for the students, but we'll still walk through it just to make sure we do kind of jog their memory and they remember what to do when plotting points. So this first point, 5, 0. So 5 is the x-coordinate, 0 is the y-coordinate. So 5, and it's positive 5, means I'm going to start at the origin and go 5 to the right. And then 0 means I'm not going to move at all up or down. So in this case, I go 5 to the right from the origin. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And none up and down. So here's that point A. 5 to the right from the origin. 0 up or down. So there's where it is. When you have a letter with your point, usually then you do label that. So this is point A, so I labeled it with an A. Point B, negative 3, 1. So the first coordinate, that x-coordinate, the first number is always the x-coordinate. That always tells us left or right. In this case, that's negative 3. So I'm going to go left 3. In this case, the y-coordinate's 1, so up 1. So there's the point negative 3, 1. That's point B. Point C, 0, negative 6. The first coordinate is 0. That means you're going to move left or right 0. You're not going to move at all from the origin. But the y-coordinate's negative 6. That means I'm going to go down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So there's the point 0, negative 6. Goes up to letter D there, 9, 2. Both those numbers are positive. So for the x-axis, I'm going to go, the x-coordinate, I'm going to go positive along the x-axis. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 to the right. And then 2 up because it's a positive 2. So there's the point 9, 2, letter D. Letter E, negative 4, negative 5. Both these numbers are negative. For the x-axis, if I'm going to go negative, that means I'm going to go to the left. So left, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then negative 5 means I'm going to go down 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the point E is right there. F is 4.5 and negative 2.5. If something's 4.5 or 3.5 or whatever the number may be, that's fine. We can still plot something like this. I'm going to go 4 to the right, and then just like a half a square. Some kind of in-between lines here, and that's fine. So 4.5 to the right, and then negative 2.5 means down 2 and again a half. So here's where the point F is, right here. Again, it should all actually in the middle of lines there, right in the middle of the square, because I went 4.5 and then down 2.5. So I end up not being right on a line there, but that's okay. That can happen. So, and then for point G, what I do recommend for students sometimes when they run into fractions is we can just change these to decimals. If they can graph it with a fraction, that's fine, or as that in that form. There's nothing wrong with that. But 1/2, I know that's 0.5, and 7 over 2, 7 divided by 2 is 3.5, so 3.5. So if I just change those into decimals, that might be just a little easier to interpret when I'm trying to plot these points and see how far to go left or right, or up or down. So in this case, the x-coordinate is 0.5, so that's just over like a half, and then up 3.5. So 1, 2, 3, and then again just a little half. So right there in the middle of that square is where G is. So there's a little review on plotting points. Again, something we'll need down the road when we start graphing equations. One more way we'll talk about the location of points is they also talk about in the coordinate plane that there are 4 different quadrants. Maybe if there's a word to write down here, that word quadrant would be kind of an important word that will come up again and again. By the prefix there, quad, there are 4 quadrants, and they are just formed by the x and y axis. Okay, here's the x-axis. And again, the up and down axis is the y-axis. Well, where these two intersect, again, we know that to be the origin, but also those axes just kind of slice this into 4 sections. 1 section, 2, 3, and 4. There's four different sections. Those are the 4 different quadrants. And the quadrants have very creative names. It's just called quadrant 1, 2, 3, and 4. So the 4 quadrants. There's quadrant 1, there's quadrant 2, there's quadrant 3, and quadrant 4. Quadrant 1 is actually the top right quadrant. And why is it the top right one? Why is that in quadrant number 1? Well, if you think about any points that are in the first quadrant, that means that you've gone to the right along the x-axis, so you're in positive numbers for an x-coordinate, and then you've also gone up on the y-axis, so you've gone positive in that direction. So any point that's in quadrant 1 is going to have a positive number for the x-coordinate and a positive number for the y-coordinate. So since they're both positive, that's quadrant 1. That's kind of our leading quadrant when everything's positive. From there, what we do for the quadrants is quadrant 1 is the top right one. Then we just kind of go counterclockwise for the other 3 quadrants. So quadrant 2 is actually over here, the top left one. All points in quadrant 2 are points where I've gone to the left along the x-axis. So that means that the x-coordinate must be negative, but I've gone up for the y-coordinate, so the y-coordinate's positive. So all points in quadrant 2 are a negative number and then a positive number. Quadrant 3, again, is we just kind of continue counterclockwise. Quadrant 3 is kitty corner from quadrant 1 here. In quadrant 1, everything is positive, positive. Well, in quadrant 3, I've gone to the left on the x-axis, so that's a negative number. That's going to be a negative number for the x-coordinate. And then I've gone down for the y-coordinate, so that's also a negative number. So in quadrant 3, everything's negative, negative. All the points will be like we had the example on the previous page, negative 4, negative 5, okay? Or negative 8, negative 20. All the points in quadrant 3, all the ordered pairs, will be 2 negative numbers. And then the last quadrant, quadrant 4. Quadrant 4, we've gone to the right on the x-axis, so the first number is positive. But then we've gone down on the y-axis, so the second number is negative. So all points in quadrant 4 will be positive, negative. This may be a little review as also for the students. Some may have seen this, but just another way we talk about locating points in the coordinate plane. We talk about the different quadrants the points could be in.